this party to care so much about life, it's just absolutely unthinkable that they literally are showing that they really don't care about lives.
I have to say that the dynamic in Texas, and I've seen this in another of other states that are dominated by Republicans, the gun legislating to me, and I would like to hear how you characterize this again as we look at images from Uvalde, Texas, where there was a mass shooting in an elementary school there today. Right now, what we think are that 18 children were murdered, 3 adults. That's the latest numbers we have, and they come from the state senator who represents that area. And we are expecting the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to speak on this shortly. But my understanding, again, so that people just sort of understand the context here in the Texas State House, I mean, that what ends up happening in the Texas State House, and I've seen this happen in a number of other Republican-dominated states, it's not like there's a policy problem that they want to solve vis-a-vis guns. It's that the politics of guns require them to ratchet up every legislative session. And because it's just them, the Democrats aren't passing bills, they're not like repealing stuff. They have to get ever more extreme so that they have some new bill to introduce, because they've been making the rules in Texas for 2 decades. So it's not like it's hard to own a gun in Texas 4 years ago, but the politics of the issue are such that they have to own the libs, and they have to show how devoted they are to the cult of the gun, such that they've got to come up with a new thing for every session.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I try to tell people all the time that we were dealing with so much political theater in the Texas House, and that's exactly what it is. The sad part is that we live in a state that has 30 million people. We can't afford to play political games. These aren't pawns. These are real people. These are real lives. And sadly enough, we continue to introduce policies that are not helping people, but instead we're hurting people. And it wasn't just the guns. I mean, you guys have been covering us for quite some time now, well over a year, because we've continued to lead this country in the wrong direction. And this is just another example of Texas getting it wrong.
Can you see any, I mean, obviously, again, we have recent history, which is at El Paso, the mass shooting by a racist murderer happened in El Paso, and the reaction at the policy level and the state level, both from the Republican governor and the Republican state legislature, was to expand access to guns. Again, we're waiting to hear how this individual who murdered these people today at this elementary school, these children, shot and killed these children, how he obtained his weapons. Bracketing that for a moment, given that was reaction in El Paso, can you imagine a university, the NRA, scheduled to hold its annual conference in Texas with Greg Abbott liking to tweet about the fact that, Texas, how much he loves guns, how much Texans love guns, how invested he is in Texans buying more guns than Californians? Can you imagine anything, any horror that could possibly happen in your state that would shake that status quo?
Sadly enough, I don't. We had members of the El Paso delegation tell stories about the families that lost lives on that day. I mean, we had people that were fine on the House floor. People recounted how the governor went to El Paso and assured those in El Paso that we would do something smart. But sadly enough, he has amnesia, and seemingly so many other folk have amnesia. I can't imagine what these parents are going through right now, but if this is not a wake-up call, I don't really know what is. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. There was no need. In a state that couldn't keep its lights on, you would think that we would focus on trying to save some sort of lives by at least being able to keep our lights on, but instead, we spent I don't know how many hours and how much money was spent in the House making sure that we expanded access to firearms in the state of Texas. It just didn't make sense, especially in the wake of what we saw in El Paso. And sadly enough, even though we don't go back into session until January of 23, I don't have high hopes that they're gonna get it right when they go back into session. They will simply scoff this off as some other random situation instead of trying to own up to the fact that their terrible failed policies are costing us lives, innocent lives, every single day.
Jasmine Crockett is a representative, a state representative in Texas. She serves in that Texas House. Thank you so much for making some time with us tonight. I want to just direct people's attention down there to the screen. You see a podium has been set up in the White House. We are expecting President Joe Biden to give a live address at any moment. We should note he's just back from a multi-day trip through East Asia. He is just getting back now. We saw the Vice President Kamala Harris react to the news earlier today. Joe Biden has a long history with gun policy. Of course, he was the mastermind and one of the chief authors of that crime bill during the Clinton years that had a whole bunch of things in it. There was a Violence Against Women Act that was part of it. There was also, of course, huge amounts of police hiring. There were also a lot of mandatory minimums that were attached to federal sentences. There are many people who point to it as a fulcrum for the rise in mass incarceration. In fact, it was something that he spent a lot of time explaining and in some cases apologizing for. But one aspect of that legislation in those Clinton years, of course, were a number of gun safety measures. During the Clinton years, of course, famously the assault weapon ban, which was then repealed once George W. Bush was in power. This was a wedge issue for many years, the site of contested conflict. And while the politics around this, both in the polling and public opinion, hasn't changed, it's still a contested issue. And in fact, polling shows majorities, and in some cases, massive supermajorities of Americans who favor some common sense restrictions on gun ownership. What has happened in the last 10 years particularly is a kind of total domination of the policy levers by the most extremist faction of American life, an extremist faction that we should say is getting more extreme in its rhetoric and also more intense in just the number of guns being produced and bought. One of the most important things to understand about this country at this moment is that the percentage of households that own guns is declining as the number of guns in the hands of people is increasing. There you see the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Joe Biden, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, coming to address the country now.
Good evening, fellow Americans. I had hoped when I became president I would not have to do this again. Another massacre, Uvalde, Texas, an elementary school. Beautiful, innocent, second, third, fourth graders. And how many scores of little children who witnessed what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. They'll live the rest of their lives. There's a lot we don't know yet, but there's a lot we do know. The parents who will never see their child again, never have them jump in bed and cuddle with them. Parents will never be the same. To lose a child is like having a piece of your soul ripped away. There's a hollowness in your chest. You feel like you're being sucked into it. You're never going to be able to get out.
Yeah.
It's suffocating. It's never quite the same. It's a feeling shared by the siblings and the grandparents and the family members and the community that's left behind. Scripture says, Jill and I have talked about this in different contexts, in other contexts. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. So many crushed spirits. So tonight, I ask the nation to pray for them and give the parents and siblings the strength in the darkness they feel right now. As a nation, we have to ask, when in God's name Are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done? It's been 3,448 days, 10 years since I stood up at a high school in Connecticut, a grade school in Connecticut, where another gunman massacred 26 people, including 20 first graders at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Since then, there have been over 900 incidents of gunfires reported on school grounds. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Santa Fe High School in Texas. Oxford High School in Michigan. The list goes on, and the list grows. When it includes mass shootings at places like movie theaters, houses of worship, as we saw just 10 days ago, the grocery store in Buffalo, New York. I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and will prevent every tragedy, but we know they work and have positive impact. When we passed the assault weapons ban, mass shootings went down. When the law expired, mass shootings tripled. The idea that an 18-year-old kid can walk into a gun store and buy 2 assault weapons is just wrong. What in God's name do you need assault weapons for except to kill someone? Deer aren't running through the forest with Kevlar vests on, for God's sake. It's just sick. And the gun manufacturers have spent 2 decades aggressively marketing assault weapons, which make them the most and largest profit. For God's sake, we have to have the courage to stand up to the industry. Here's what else I know. Most Americans support common sense laws, common sense gun laws. I just got off a trip from Asia, meeting with Asian leaders. And I learned of this while I was on the aircraft. And what struck me on that 17-hour flight, what struck me was these kinds of mass shootings rarely happen anywhere else in the world. Why? They have mental health problems. They have domestic disputes in other countries. They have people who are lost. But these kinds of mass shootings never happen with the kind of frequency they happen in America. Why? Why are we willing to live with this carnage? Why do we keep letting this happen? Where in God's name is our backbone? Have the courage to deal with it and stand up to the lobbies. It's time to turn this pain into action. For every parent, for every citizen in this country, we have to make it clear to every elected official in this country, it's time to act. It's time for those who obstruct or delay or block the common sense gun laws. We need to let you know that we will not forget. We can do so much more. We have to do more. Our prayer tonight is for those parents lying in bed and trying to figure out, will I be able to sleep again? What do I say to my other children? What happens tomorrow? May God bless the loss of innocent life on this sad day. And may the Lord be near the brokenhearted and save those crushed in spirit, because they're going to need a lot of help, a lot of our prayers. God love you.
Will you go to Texas, sir? Sir, will you go to Texas? President of the United States, Joe Biden, addressing the country tonight, clearly grief-stricken and weary a man who, of course, famously knows the grief of losing a child and then of an adult son, of a loved one.